Event here in the European Parliament with me, Joe Littobowski. I'm the editor of Debating Europe, and with me are a panel of esteemed guests. We have Elly Schlein, who is an Italian MEP who sits with the S&D, the Socialist and Democrat group in the European Parliament. Next to her is Andrea Gerosa, who is the founder and chief thinker of ThinkYoung, a think tank that focuses on young people. To my right, we have Aurélien Pommier, who is a president of the European Student Think Tank. Next to him is Katrina Koppel, vice president of the European Students' Union. And today we're going to be talking about young Europeans and their participation in politics. This is in the context of the European Parliament elections in May. One of the peculiarities of the European Parliament elections is that young Europeans tend to have the highest levels of support for Europe, for European integration and the EU, and yet youth turnout in EU elections is the lowest of all the different age cohorts. In 2014, only 28% of 18 to 24-year-olds voted. And obviously, I assume that the panel would like to reverse this trend. So we'll kick off with a question from a reader, who is Andrea. Andrea says, young people are the future of Europe. EU member states need to motivate young people in order to participate in politics. Otherwise, the young generation will be without a voice and older people will define the future of our generation. So I'll start with you, Elly. Why don't young Europeans vote, and how can we change that?
Well, probably a lot of young Europeans don't feel represented, don't feel listened to. And we can do a lot to change that. For instance, we can try to be better politicians. I think the main responsibility is on the shoulder of politicians to listen to young people, and also on young people to participate more. Once you realize that if you don't feel represented anymore, I was one of those, and you let politics to others, still their decision will impact your life, then you realize that if you want to make a change, you have to be part of that change and participate somehow. So I think this is what led many of us to be involved directly in politics.
Okay, so you'd agree we need younger politicians, we need kind of more fresh ideas. How do we get young people to participate in politics?
Well, first of all, I would say in the political election, because that's where they don't participate. Young people, they participate a lot in politics and in policies, as we can see on the streets of Europe in these days, but as we've seen in the streets of the United States with My Life Matters and a lot of movement that were grassroots and started from out of nothing. So without a hierarchy, without a party maybe involving them, or without an association trying to put them, but they, grassroots organize themselves. So there is a lot of interest of young people to participate. How do we channel this into making them to vote? Younger faces, politicians with younger faces definitely help, but also topics that relate to young people when there is a political debate. Nobody speaks about education, nobody speaks about startups, nobody speaks about mobility, things that could help young people to deal about something they know about. And put things on the agenda that can involve young people. That's definitely would help.
Okay. So this is a common argument that young people do participate in politics, but they don't participate in elections. Perhaps it's alternative forms of participation. It's street marches. You saw the big climate marches that happened very recently. Young people are very engaged on social media and so on. So Katrina, is that how young people participate? Is it not necessarily through the ballot box, but through other ways of participation?
I wouldn't say that one sort of negates the other. I was definitely one of those younger people when I was about a decade younger than now, not yet eligible to vote, but still knowing something about politics, sort of imagining that I will never get interested or involved in the more formal side of politics, because there was no trust, but also there was no expectation from the older generations, because the older generations are used to, oh, well, the elections are decided by the seniors because they are the most vocal, they have the most time to think or talk about politics. Young people, you just do your own stuff and your time will come sometime later in life. Except we're now at a situation where if we don't act now, if we don't get involved now, like with the climate march, there is no later in life. It will be too late to sort of, for example, reverse the climate trauma that is ongoing.
Yes.
But on the other hand, young people are involved in politics very much. I really sort of, for example, dislike the term selectivism. I think action on social media has a lot of power, and young people do engage in it a lot because that is increasingly their sort of environment, their fora, where they have the voice and they cannot be sort of put down by older people saying that, oh, well, maybe young people don't know well enough yet to be experts on anything. And young people are only experts on being young people, if that.
So, Aurélien, like this actually, selectivism being a sort of a negative, a criticism of young people, it's a very common criticism we hear, and this actually relates to a comment that we had sent in from Alex, who says, as an early millennial, I would say, yes, we are less politically involved than previous generations. We don't want politics because we're comfortable where we are. We do our part by retweeting things and writing angry Facebook comments. So obviously he's quite cynical. He presumably would label it selectivism. What would you think? Do young people, are they less engaged in, can you do both? Can you be sort of engaged in kind of traditional politics and also kind of online, social media and so on?
Yeah, I do think we can do both, and I tend to disagree with Alex and agree on the other side.
Yes.
I do agree with what was said. And we really need to dispel the myth that people are not involved in politics or bored by politics. That's not the truth. It's just that young people using other channels, other ways to be active. We talked about social media, we talked about online tools. And of course, we need to create those online tools, those public space for young people to participate and be involved. But it doesn't mean that we have to roll out traditional participation, and that doesn't mean we have to roll out all the people, all the generation. I think, coming back on what the first comment on Andrea, that all the people will decide for us, what we need is actually create bridges between older generation and younger generation to work together, older generation to help the younger generation. So I do agree with Alex in the fact that young people are retracting things, writing comments on Facebook, not only angry, meaning that they're using alternative forms of participation,
yes.
New forms. And politicians and European institutions should go in this direction. Go digital and go speak the language of young people.
Yes. So here's what concerns me very much about this debate. So Europe, if you look at the demographic trends, Europe is an aging continent, obviously. And this comment from Frida, I think, sort of sums up the possible structural issue in this debate, which he says he thinks young people are less politically engaged today, but with good reason. He believes Europe's demographic trends means that young people are destined to always be a minority, outvoted on issues by a more conservative older vote. So essentially, low birth rates, emigration, like Italy, for example, is a country with one of the highest average ages in the European Union. What do you think? Are we doomed for young people to support an older population without having the numbers to outvote them?
I think it's possible to make a change. As we were discussing before, there is a general feeling that your vote will not make a difference. I think this is part of the reason why we see a lot of young activism in other forms that are not the traditional forms, for example, of political parties, but we see many young people involved in association for climate issues. We saw what happened the other day was impressive, and it was for sure helped by the fact that the call for action started from a very young girl, Greta Thunberg, and you can feel immediately connected. We can ask ourselves what would happen if Greta was maybe 60 years old. So there is this general idea that your vote will not make a difference, but we can change that because, I mean, many of us would have never thought that we would be able to actually engage in politics, go into the institution, and even in a parliament with such a high average of age, we have 55 years, we are respected here. We can work on our competence. I like the idea that, yeah, sometimes we think, oh, you're only competent in being young, but it's not true. I mean, we can really prove ourselves if we get to the institution. The only point, and I will conclude with that, how can politics, with humility, try to reconnect with what is moving already in society? And this activism activism and this association that are doing the fight for real with many young people. This is the issue, how we can reconnect. Because of course, these fights have to be brought into the institution
Yes.
to really make a change
Yes.
in decision making.
But this is the key point, isn't it? So young people are frustrated with the kind of policies that are being taken, the very short-term policies when we're, if we're talking about climate change or something, the implications are very long-term and will affect them very much in the future. So perhaps they're rejecting the kind of traditional way of politics and they're moving on to street marches and protests and so on. But can that actually get anything done? Can you, you can put pressure, but ultimately they have to vote. Isn't that the case, Andrea?
It is the case. I want to say two things. The first
Yes.
one to Frieder, because I think we owe him an answer. Yes, young people, statistically, demographically, are going to be less than older generation. That's a fact. Now, do you want to be a silent minority or do you want to be a noisy minority? And I think...
And be a majority then.
and eventually be so noisy that you convince the others. And I think young people do have arguments to make sure that let's say, older generation understand. That's a point one. Point two, we live in a world where the word disruption, it's very important. Whether we talk about business, whether we talk about NGOs, whether maybe it's time to disrupt politics. How do we do it? Well, that's something that, they probably have to figure it out. And maybe the first politician who will be able to figure it out, how to disrupt politics and how to disrupt the traditional way democracy works, then will be a winning politician. And that's how a lot of startups were able to do in their industry. And until someone does it, we probably, we can have million debates. And then one day, one guy will come, will do it, or one girl probably will come and do it. And we will say, that was a way you could disrupt politics. So I think it's time. I think it's about to happen. It's not happened yet. How? We will see. Greta could be a great example.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's look at some suggestions from our readers. So in terms of making a minority a majority, one of the suggestions that we've had put forwards is lower the voting age to 16. We had a comment sent in from Kristen, who says, I support lowering the voting age to 16 because young people are very unrepresented in political processes, and in an aging Europe, that is an increasing problem. Katrina, what do you think? Votes at 16, would that be a solution?
Well, votes at 16 can certainly be a part of the solution, but sort of going a little bit back to the previous question, every age group by themselves is a minority. That's how age groups work. Unless we have a sort of very, very sudden demographic change, it's always going to be the case. But I don't think that young people are necessarily discouraged by the fact that there's less of them. It's just that the topics that they are aimed at then are skate parks and basketball courts instead of engaging them in the daily politics.
Yes.
But sort of going back to what Kristen has just suggested, it can be possible that as the sort of demographic trend certainly will continue, that the population of Europe will get older and older.
Yes.
I think there is a sort of argument for bringing younger people in, because in my opinion, the sort of 18 level is quite arbitrary. I'm not really sure why that still exists. And sort of back home, where the age has already been lowered to 16 in certain elections, the argument against that was, well, young people are not experienced enough in politics. But then I can say that my some of the grown-up part of my family are not experienced enough in politics to be allowed to vote. So how do we control who is smart or good or a citizen enough to vote?
So we keep coming back to this, that politicians aren't addressing the issues that young people care about. So things like youth unemployment and like housing, getting of the house, education. Instead, as you say, kind of it's basketball courts and kind of like put a sort of a fob to.
Well, I think one of those topics is the future of retirement, which young people are not really engaged in when talking about the pension systems. They usually engage the sort of already senior citizens who already use the pension systems. But the younger people who will one day be of the age to retire, they have no idea at this point what their world will look like once they can or do not want to any longer work.
Yes. So, Aurélien, do you think then, so the question is, how can we get politicians talking about issues that young people care about? I come again to this idea that young people need to vote. Politicians listen to people who vote. So if we lower the voting age to 16, obviously this is down to member states to make this decision, but do you think lowering the voting age to 16 could kind of put more force behind the youth vote and get politicians to listen, or is it?
I think that's a tricky question because there is pros and cons, of course, to lowering the voting age to 16. Myself, at 16, I don't think if I was able to be enough knowledgeable about the issue of EU politics or national politics to vote. But it's also because in my country, in France, the voting age is 18, so I didn't feel the need to be socialized to politics yet. If we lowered the voting age to 16, maybe some overtraining at school, civic education will be before the age of 18 or before the age of 16, so it will help young people to vote at this time. So could be a good idea. I know that some member states in the EU already did that, for example in Austria.
Yes.
So I think that's a good example to see how it works and see if there is benefit. But of course, if we lower the voting age to 16, it means more young people will vote, more young people as a group, so politicians will want to get this vote. So they will act accordingly.
And Elly, in Italy, I think for Senate elections, the voting age is 25. Is that correct? So maybe lower the voting age to 18? Could that be a first step?
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, if you think about it, our generation have much wider access to information compared to the previous generation. At the same time, education should help, at least in developing critical thinking. So I would definitely be in favor of that, because I think that it's about, you know, also trying to improve the participation of young people and trying to improve also the quality of democracy.
And I just want to put a question to you from a reader, because Andrea mentioned one of the first things he said was that we need younger politicians. And this is exactly the question from PG, who sent us in a comment saying that he's in his 70s, but he thinks there should be more young politicians in Europe. Now, you said that the average age, I think, in the European Parliament is 55. Okay. Yeah. How can we get more young young politicians in the European Parliament?
Well, just to add another layer to the discussion, I think that the reason why young people also recently haven't turned out a lot to vote for the European election is because we have national debates that are so focused only on the national dimension, which is crazy, because all the biggest challenges on which our future is at stake, as young people are showing us, climate change, migration, tax justice, for example, but also democratizing the EU and also the social dimension, are challenges that we can only fight at the European level and cannot find an answer anymore at the national level. So the point is how to create a much more European debate. And the press has also a responsibility in that by not being superficial when talking about the decision-making process at the European level. And at the same time, again, there is a political responsibilities of the parties to show that we can do some changes fundamental for their future also at this level. Then we will probably see. And I think...
Which means putting forward young candidates.
As well. And this is also about party structures. And in my country, politics is not something that I mean, it's not something for young people, unfortunately, today. Also because of the logics and the structure behind, but we have to revert and to change that logic as well. And I think that ultimately, also in the national debates and election, we need the voice of young people. Otherwise, who will decide for us and for our future? And really, our generation, I think, feels much more European because we were born. I was born in 1985. I was born when the flags were, you know, waving. And now it's our responsibility as well to realize what has not worked of the European integration and to complete the process with the things that we are lacking today, but are fundamental to complete the idea of the people of the Manifesto of Ventotene and the founding fathers and mothers of the European Union. So it's our responsibility, and I think our generation feels more European already.
So, Andrea, what Elly just said, I think for young Italians, I think she said politics in Italy is not for young people, like, or young people feel excluded from politics in Italy. And I think that's a common feeling. If you look in Italy, there is young Italians, there's very high immigration to other member states. There's a feeling that they're kind of locked out of politics. we change that? Like, I mean, is that a structural problem? Like, how do you fix?
Well, I guess there are
It's a cultural problem.
two calls to make.
Yes.
One call to traditional politicians, as she was saying.
Yes.
Guys, open up the party for younger faces.
Yes.
Because obviously, if the door is closed, it's difficult. Also, maybe a call to young people as well.
Yes.
As much as you are going out on the street on Friday afternoon, which is great, take
Yes.
the risk and jump into politics.
Yes.
I mean, she took a risk when
Yes.
she ran for European
Yeah.
Parliament, as many other young ones who probably didn't make it. But that's how you start, create yourself a base of people that trust you, a base of voters, and at the end of the day, democracy works by bringing votes to your party. So if you have to start young. You have to start young, and when you start, then you start building a base, and then eventually one day your party, as she did, will recognize, put you there, and then win the debate. And also make sure that the topics that are related to young people are interested, but also the other way around. Young people who bring up topics that could be interesting for a different generation. At ThinkYoung, we do studies. That's our job. We do studies on young people. We did a study on over 10,000 young Europeans in Europe. And they don't only talk about education and startup, which are important, but they also talk about, what about the European single army? Do we need an army which is European? Most of them are in favor. They talk about family policies, supporting children. When you're in a family, you have many children. It's something that, when you're 18, 19, you don't immediately think. What Katrina said before, get engaged into the pension debate.
Yes.
So the call, obviously we're all in favor of young people, and I guess
Yes.
we're fairly young around the table, but I think we should also do a call to ourselves and the younger one to say, guys, let's take the risk, let's talk about topics that are not maybe familiar to us, and that eventually will together bring to a new way of doing politics.
And Katrina, this is, again, we keep sort of coming back to this, but it seems to be that, there really is, I mean, I'll come to a comment from one of our readers who says that it is Carla who blames young people for not being engaged. Carla says, in my opinion, young people take no interest in the political debate as they have less knowledge about politics and they think politics is difficult to understand, or they want real change without proper knowledge of the issues, making them participate less in the debate. If young people were more engaged in politics, this is sort of the cart before the horse. If young people were more engaged in politics, it would force politicians to address the issues that they care about.
That's true, in a way, but in another way, politicians sometimes already address the topics that young people are interested in, except in the opposite way.
Yes.
So, for example, when we look at LGBT rights across the world, young people are statistically much more likely to be for equality, for marriage equality, etc. However, the political turn in the recent years has been towards conservatism, at least in Europe. So I don't think that young people think or understand politics as difficult. I think it is more that they are not taken seriously, and it sort of creates a self-fulfilling prophecy that, okay, I've been told my whole life that I'm too young to understand about politics,
Yes.
so therefore I'm too young to understand about politics. The question is, when are you no longer too young to understand politics, and how does that knowledge then magically come upon you? So, for example, if Carla here thinks that young people are sort of unable to participate in a debate as they see it as difficult, when is that age when I will magically now be able to participate and now understand
Yes.
politics?
No, that's an excellent point. And actually it leads nicely onto a comment from Anna, which I'll put to you, Aurélien. She says, I think the key is how we are taught politics, because we are constantly fed the stereotype that politics is something we won't find interesting. So is it about sort of civic lessons and teaching in school the importance of politics and civic engagement and so on? Do you think that is the issue?
Yeah, I think that's one of the issue, a major issue. There is not enough civic engagement, civic education in schools. Also, communication is a big issue. When we heard about politics in the news at schools, it's most of the time because of scandal, because some things went wrong.
So it's a negative.
It's a negative discussion about politics. And we don't hear much about politics when something is right, something is good. So, for example, when the EU is coming up, it is not because there is a good achievement, like the roaming or like the ban of single-use plastic. It is because there is scandal at the Commission or something else. So we need also to communicate more efficiently on the positive things that the EU is achieving, so people can realize that EU is impacting them in their daily lives.
Yes.
And with concrete proposal and achievements.
Okay.
I think a good example of good communication when something is positive is the ongoing communication in regards to Erasmus, which is a sort of flagship European project that has its many issues that we work on as the European Students' Union daily. But the fact that Erasmus is being doubled or tripled, according to the Commission or Parliament, is a topic that young people know fairly well. Young people also know Erasmus, and from personal experience, having attended many a meeting, young people are also listened to when it comes to Erasmus because they are the group that is most involved in it. Because despite Erasmus being also geared towards staff mobility and student mobility, and not all students are young, the prevailing group of people who engage in Erasmus are still young people, and that does bring them closer to politics. And statistics show that people who have been through the Erasmus program feel more European and feel more engaged.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's take a sort of step back. I've been saying, if young people want to have politicians address the issues they care about, then they need to vote and they need to engage in the institutions, as you were saying, Elly. But we also had comments saying that we need to change the way democracy works. We need more direct democracy. Democracy, obviously, it's got a hundreds-year history. Perhaps the kind of model of liberal democracy that we have now isn't working, isn't coping with the kind of changes of technology and so on. So we had a comment from Montanu, who wants to see more genuine direct democracy in the EU. He talks about the European Citizens Initiative, which obviously is one of the channels of direct democracy that was brought in with the Lisbon Treaty. If 1 million EU citizens sign a petition, then they can have it considered by the European Commission. But he sees it as a waste of time because there's no binding enactment of the petition. It's just considered by the Commission, and he says it's maybe one of the reasons why Euroscepticism is rising. Pretending to listen doesn't help. So is it that the EU is not responsive enough in terms of the democratic channels that it offers?
There's a lot of room for improvement,
yes.
But I wouldn't agree that the European Citizen Initiative is a waste of time. It's definitely an instrument that should be strengthened in that direction, because it's true, it's frustrating. There are a number of initiatives that ended up with, no real change, no concrete change, but on the other hand, we've seen many. For example, the first successful one was on the right to water. And it helps also connecting the different levels of governance, because you can see on the common goods like water, you can see mobilization at the local level, at the national level, with a referendum in Italy, for example, with a very high turnout of people, higher than for the political election. And at the European level, it worked. And of course, we took the chance to press the European Commission to act on the issue. But for sure, it should be mandatory and binding as an instrument to be strengthened. It also helps creating a European debate that we really need in order to improve. But just one last point on this. I think that young people think that there is this general stereotype that you were discussing, that politics is boring, but something is changing. Look at the squares. For example, in my country, on solidarity with migrants, on climate change the other day, mobilizing together is now finally becoming cool again. And this is the first step to try to rejoin this kind of mobilization with politics and try to bring them here where we can together make a change, because you can put political pressure from outside and it helps a lot. At the same time, then you have to come here and to change the laws and to change the policies in order to make that change happen.
Okay, we're almost out of time, Andrea. I'm going to ask you for last remarks. I'll put you on the spot. Do you think that the upcoming elections, do you think youth turnout will be higher than in 2014? And if it's not, what do you think we can do to make sure it is?
I am afraid that it's not going to be higher, to be honest. And what we can do, I think we just spent half an hour speaking about it, meaning, young faces, the topic that engage young people, and having young people that, take the risk and join. And making a bet on election is always difficult, as she knows extremely well. But I'm afraid we're going to see a lower turnout of young people. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm very wrong.
There is a campaign of the European Parliament to raise awareness on young people to vote. So these instruments might help, I hope.
Okay, and if you're watching this and you are a young person, please, there is still time in most EU member states to register to vote for the EU elections in May. I'd like to thank my panel for being with us, and you can continue the debate on debatingeurope.eu. Please feel free to leave comments. We're having another debate on the same topic in April, so we'll take some of the comments which are generated by this debate to that. Thank you very much for the panelists for taking part, and thank you for watching.
Thank you.
Thank you.